Today we're going to look at making piping, which can give you a beautiful accent line in your work and is also a little bit of a dimensional aspect as well.
So last month you showed them what in club?
Last month you saw the twin gimping, which we've got here. I've done in a light and a dark shade of each colour to give you again a dimensional look with the crochet cotton underneath. This is a size 1 piping cord, and I've cut my fabric strips along the straight of grain 1 inch wide. So leave a little piece of piping out the end of your fabric and fold it over, wrapping the cord. I like to roll my fingers like so to make sure that the cord is right in against the fold. We have the piping foot on the machine, and the piping foot has a cut-out groove on the back, which allows the piping cord to sit into that groove, keeping your stitching right against that piping. So,
what stitch length do you use? Just normal 2.5?
Yep, normal 2.5. The first little section, maybe an inch or so of your stitching, might be not quite so perfect while you just get that all lined up perfectly from that point on. Again, try and make sure that the piping cord is sitting right into the fold of the fabric, right in the halfway. You can see it there. Start your stitching along, and section by section.
So you've actually started with the foot and the needle completely on the fabric?
Yes.
Okay, not off and then tried to get on it?
No, start on the fabric, which you always need to allow for at least an inch or so of an edge that isn't going to be used and accounted for in your project. Continue stitching along. Because the groove is underneath the base of that foot and your piping cord sits in, it's quite an easy process to keep that needle against the piping cord. Section at a time, folding and lining up the two raw edges.
So it doesn't matter what brand machine that you have, the piping feet within those brands will behave the same way. So we're talking here Hosfun Viking.
Yep.
So if you've got a Bernina or a Pfaff, Janome, you should seek out the piping foot in that brand.
If your brand of machine doesn't allow or doesn't have a piping foot similar to this, you also can use your zipper foot. Okay. Shift your needle position.
So the piping foot just makes it so much more accurate, doesn't it?
It does, very. A lot simpler.
Yes, because I can't go that fast with my zipper foot in piping.
No. It does.
It's that groove that's under it.
Yeah. That piping cord just naturally wants to sit into that groove, and you can do your piping in no time. And all the way to the end.
Okay.
So as you can see, we have our stitching line beautifully against the edge there, making that piping cord sit into that fabric nice and snugly. Now I have a contrasting thread here. This is a yellow thread on the green fabric to make it a little easier for you to see. If you are doing this at home for your project, try and use, where possible, a matching thread for the fabric that you're stitching. That way, if you're piecing it in, it won't be seen, the thread won't be seen if you make just a little bit of a mistake.
Okay.
So now we are going to look at the concept of going around a corner. As you can see here, the piping continues around the corner. Where we go around the corner itself with the piping, not the outside seam allowance, we want as sharp a corner as we possibly can. As you can see, we've cut the seam allowance there to allow for us to bend and go around the corner. So we'll stitch one of those now. You can do it two ways. You can anticipate the distance from the stitching line to the edge of your seam allowance, and measure the same distance from the edge of the fabric in and snip before you have sewn, or you can do it as you come to it. Line the raw edge of your piping foot up with the raw edge of your fabric and stitch the piping to the fabric with your piping foot. Again, the piping cord runs under the groove and it keeps the stitching line beautifully against your piping. So we're going to stop the same distance away as we have from the stitching line to the edge of our seam allowance. I'm going to pause just a moment before, and I'm going to stick the tip of my scissors in there. Just nipping to the seam line, as you can see. Continue down, leave my needle in the down position, and then twisting around. Now, if you pull on the fabric, then you'll get slightly rounded corners. If you push the cording back slightly, then you'll get a sharper, neater corner. Stitch a couple of stitches and then line up and continue as you go. As you can see, we have a nice sharp corner. So the other thing we will mention is also a join. And how do you join piping without the two pieces going over the top of each other and creating quite a lump in your fabric? So the way to join, leave a gap between the two ends that you have, and you can leave this gap to be longer if you wish. This is just a small sample piece. Grab the piece of piping cord that you've left hanging out the end of your fabric and pull that back to expose more of that piping cord. I'm going to trim this off and pull the fabric back over the top, and I can feel my piping cord ends here. Now what I want is the other piece of cord to have the cord finish at the same point this one does. So I'm going to place a pin where I can feel that piping cord ends, and that is just my little reference piece. Now my second, I'm going to lay the original one down, lay my second one across, so I can roughly line up that position there where the two will meet, the two piping cords. I'm going to place another pin at that position, okay, again as a reference. Now what I want to do is expose the piping cord again so I can trim piping cord only back to this place. Now I have a lot of piping cord extra here, so I'm going to snip this off because I don't need that piece anyway. I'm going to open my piping a little so I can get to that piece of cord. I'm going to grab the cord and I'm going to pull it back. Now I'm going to just shift my pin so it's just through the fabric, okay, and I can lay the two. Again, this is a little bit trickier because we've got a small sample piece here. I can now use this as a rough guide. I need to pull my fabric back to about here, lay the two together and use it as a guide as to where you need to pin to. Okay, meet that pin, snip that cord off and pull that back. Now what you should have is your piping cord finishing in the second piece at roughly the same position as your first.
Looking good.
Okay, so remove your pins. Now you can just use your finger to feel. You're going to stitch along here later on up to this point where the fabric is just on its own and no piping cord, and this one you're going to veer off down below and outside our seam allowance area. The next one you're going to stitch the same sort of way, but it's going to at that same point veer off. Now I like to put a pin here to hold things roughly in place. I'm going to stitch down here as though this is one continuous piece and continue back down along the edge. going to remove my pin and just gently hold it with my fingers, continuing down as though it is one piece. Now you can see when we trim our excess fabric off at the edge, we have a piping that has a little overlap of fabric but no extra bulk of multiple layers of piping cord.